Good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas Eve. If you have stuck with me all the way through this whole month of reading this Advent Read Aloud, congratulations. Today is our last chapter, and we get to find out all the answers to the Christmas mystery. And I can't wait to see what we find out about Elizabeth and who John is. So, I love the picture for today. It's Mary and Joseph and the little baby and a bunch of, do you see them tiny little sheep running around? So cute. The 24th of December. Christmas Eve began as usual. There was always some last-minute tasks that had to be done and last-minute presents to be wrapped up. Have you done all your wrapping? I actually finished early this year. I'm so proud of myself. Now and again, one of them would sneak into Joaquin's room and glance expectantly at the magic advent calendar. They had promised not to open it until the bells rang Christmas in. Later in the day, they began to prepare Christmas dinner. Before long, the whole house was smelling of Christmas. At last, it was 5 o'clock. Papa opened a window, and now they could hear the church bells ringing. Nobody said anything, but they all crept into the bedroom. Joaquin climbed onto the bed and opened the last big door in the calendar. It was the one that covered the manger with the Christ child. The picture beneath it showed a cave in a mountain. For the last time, they sat on the edge of the bed. Joaquin unfolded the thin sheet of paper and read aloud to Mama and Papa. The Christ child. It's the middle of the world, between Europe, Asia, and Africa. It's in the middle of history at the beginning of our era. Soon it will be the middle of the night as well. A silent crowd is stealing upwards between the houses in Bethlehem. They are a little flock of 7 sheep, 4 shepherds, 5 angels of the Lord, 3 kings of Orient, 1 Roman emperor, the governor of Syria, and Elizabeth from the long, narrow country below the North Pole. The weak glow of oil lamps is streaming from the windows in a few of the simple houses, but most people in the old town have gone to bed for the night. One of the wise men points up at the sky where the stars are burning in the darkness. They are like sparks from a beacon far away. One star is shining more brightly than all the other stars in the sky. It looks as if it's hanging a little lower in the sky as well. Did you all see the Bethlehem star a couple of nights ago? It's actually not a star. It's the convergence, what that means is 2 planets, and in this case it was Saturn and Jupiter. And the way we can see them from Earth, they're one behind the other. So they, in the sky, because they're like this, they look like one big bright star, but they're actually planets. So it's pretty amazing. So it looks, and that may very well have been what the Magi saw this same night. It looks as if it's hanging a little lower in the sky as well. O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie, above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by, murmurs Elizabeth softly, remembering an old carol. The angel imperial turns towards the others, puts a finger to his lips, and whispers, hush, hush. The procession of pilgrims gathers in front of one of the inns in the town. In a moment or two, the innkeeper appears at the window. When he sees the group outside, he nods firmly and points to a cave in the wall of a rock. The angel ethereal whispers something. It sounds like the words of a nursery rhyme. And while they were there, the time came for her child to be born, and she gave birth to her son, her firstborn. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. They creep across the yard and stop in front of the cave. The smell from it tells them that it's a stable. Suddenly the silence is broken by the cry of a child. It is happening now. It is happening in a stable in Bethlehem. Over the stable, a star is twinkling. Inside the stable, the newborn child is wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. This is a meeting of heaven and earth. For the child in the manger is also a spark from the great beacon behind those weak lanterns in the sky. This is the wonder. It is a wonder every time a new child comes into the world. This is how it is when the world is created anew under heaven. A woman is breathing deeply and weeping, not out of sadness. Mary is weeping quietly, deeply, and happily. But the child's cries drown out Mary. The Christ child is born. He has been born in a stable in Bethlehem. He has come to our miserable world. The angel Ephraim turns solemnly towards the other pilgrims and says, "Unto you this day is born this day in the city of David a Savior." The Emperor Augustus nods. And now it's our turn. Everyone is to take up their places. Everyone must remember their lines. We have rehearsed this for almost 2,000 years. Quirinius speaks at a sign from the emperor. "Shepherds, take your flock out into the fields and never forget to be good shepherds. Wise men, depart from the desert and mount your camels, each one of you. May you never cease to read the stars in the sky. Angels, fly high above the clouds. All of you, do not reveal yourselves to people on earth unless it is absolutely necessary. And never forget to say, 'Fear not, for now Jesus is born.'" The next moment, all the shepherds and sheep, the angels and the wise men, had vanished. Elizabeth was left alone with Quirinius and the Emperor Augustus. "I must hurry home to Damascus," said Quirinius. "I have an important role to play there." "And I must go back to Rome," said Augustus. "That is my role." Before they went, Elizabeth pointed at the stable and asked, "Do you think that I may go in?" The emperor smiled from ear to ear. "Of course you are to go in. That is your role." Quirinius nodded energetically. "You haven't come all this long way just to hang about." With those words, the two Romans started running back along the way they had come. Elizabeth looked up at the starry sky. She had to tilt her head far back to see the big star that was shining so brightly. Again, she heard the cry of a child from inside the cave. So she went into the stable. Papa got up from the bed and punched Joachim on the shoulder. "Well, we certainly took a remarkable advent calendar home with us this year," he said. He seemed to have finished with it all. Joachim wasn't as pleased as he was. For what happened to Elizabeth? Mama sat for a while thinking too. When she got to her feet at last, she said, "Christmas dinner will be ready soon. Perhaps you could put the presents under the tree while we're waiting. There are a few little surprises this year as well." That was exactly what she said. And then the doorbell rang. It was Joachim who opened it again. And again, old John was standing outside. Today, he was beaming even more than yesterday. "I've come just to thank you," he said. Mama and Papa hurried up and beckoned him in. The macaroon cake was put out on the table again. Only the topmost ring was missing. Papa had put a ball of red marzipan on it instead. Joachim brought out coffee cups and plates. They sat round the coffee table, and John looked at all three of them in turn. He had a mysterious expression on his face. "When I drew the large picture on the magic advent calendar," he said, "I tried to do it in such a way that there would always be something new to discover. All God's creation was like that, I thought. The more we understand, the more we see in things around us, and the more we see in things around us, the more we understand. So there will always be something new to discover, if we only have our eyes and ears open to the remarkable world we live in." Papa nodded, and John went on. "But I didn't know that the advent calendar was made so that the person who read the scraps of paper would also solve the old mystery of the little girl who disappeared from town almost 50 years ago." Have you found out something more about Elizabeth? Asked Joachim. But John didn't have time to answer, for the next moment, the doorbell went again. Mama looked at Papa, and Papa looked at Mama. "You'd better open it, Joachim," said John. "I expect you're the person who has opened all the doors in the magic advent calendar. Now you must open this last door as well. But you must open it from the inside." As he crossed the floor, Joachim noticed that Mama and Papa were holding hands. Surely they weren't afraid that it might be the angel Ethereal come to visit. When he opened the front door, a woman, aged about 50, was standing there. She was wearing a red coat and had fair hair with a little gray in it. The woman gave him a big smile and held out her hand. "Joachim," she said. Joachim felt a bit dizzy, but he knew who she was, so he shook her hand. "Elizabeth Hansen," he said. "Won't you come in?" When they came into the sitting room, Mama and Papa were still holding hands. Now the old flower seller gave up keeping a straight face and burst out laughing. Joachim thought he was a bit like Bishop Nicholas in the Magic Advent Calendar. Elizabeth was left standing in the middle of the room with her red coat over her arm. Round her neck she was wearing a silver cross set with a red stone. When John at last managed to stop laughing, he got up from his chair and said, "Perhaps I should introduce you. This is Elizabeth Tabasile Hansen, one and the same person. I came a few minutes ahead of her, but here she is." Mama and Papa looked confused, so just in case, Joachim stood in front of them and started to flap his arms. "Fear not," he said. "Fear not! Fear not!" Only then did they get up from the sofa to shake Elizabeth's hand. Mama took her coat and brought another chair, and Papa went to fetch another cup of coffee from the kitchen. It appeared that she spoke only English. When they had all sat down again, Papa spoke in Norwegian all the same. "I think I must ask for an explanation," he said. "I think I must also demand a proper explanation." "And I'll give it in Norwegian for the boy's sake," said John. "It's to his credit that we are all able to be here today." It looked as if the woman with the necklace understood what he was saying, for she looked down at Joachim and smiled. "Go on," said Papa. "When I came to see you yesterday, I already knew that Elizabeth was on her way to Norway," began the flower seller. "Why didn't you tell us?" cried Mama. John chuckled. "One doesn't open a Christmas present before Christmas Eve. Besides, I couldn't be quite sure whether she would really come. I couldn't even be quite sure she would be coming, or who would be coming." Papa began to shake his head. For a while it looked as if he would never get it back straight again. No, I don't understand this," he said. So John explained what had happened. "It began several years ago, when I talked to Joachim on the phone. For many years I've tried to trace either a certain Elizabeth or a certain Tabasile, for I was convinced that she was the one and the same person. But it was Joachim who hinted to me that perhaps Elizabeth used Tabasile as her last name. I called information, was given a telephone number in Rome, and rang her. It didn't take long for her to remember me from those magic days in April 1961. Elizabeth tried to say something, but John interrupted her with a wave of his hand. I told her the story of a mother who had lost her child in 1948. That's how I could tell her who she was. She came to town late yesterday evening. She has not set foot in this place since she disappeared that December day 45 years ago." Papa jumped up from the sofa and went to the phone. "What is it?" asked Mama. "I promised to phone Mrs. Hansen as soon as I heard anything new." John laughed. "Elizabeth stayed with her mother last night. They scarcely closed their eyes, but everything is in good order, I assure you." "Well, then I must phone the police," insisted Papa, "so that they can close the old case of the girl who disappeared." "That's been arranged as well," replied John. "You can't have heard the news today. The whole country is delighted about it." Papa sank back in the sofa. There was nothing more for him to do. He could only sit and listen to the rest of what John had to tell. "May I ask a question?" he asked. "Exactly what did happen in December 1948? And don't tell me that Elizabeth set off after a lamb and met an angel called Ethereal. He turned towards Elizabeth and asked her the same question in English. She put a hand to her mouth to keep back an explosion of laughter and sighed to John that he should answer. She always begins to laugh when we talk about that, explained John. We can't agree on it. I'll give you Elizabeth's explanation first. She thinks the police in this town did a very bad job, but I think we should begin at the other end. Begin at whatever end you like, as long as you can get the ends to meet, said Papa. Elizabeth grew up in a little village near Bethlehem, said John. The people there lived off the poor land they tilled, and even this poor land was taken away from them. When I met Elizabeth in Rome in the spring of 1961, she had lived in different refugee camps, first in Jordan, afterwards in Lebanon. She went to Rome in order to explain the refugee situation. Well, never mind, we can talk about that later. But Elizabeth really did go to Bethlehem in December 1948. She came to poor, persecuted people who needed God's help. That's what she meant when she said she had been kidnapped by an angel. She meant she had been kidnapped by someone who wanted to help the people in the villages around Bethlehem. She grew up there as a shepherd girl, so she was able to stroke the soft fleece of the lambs at an early age, just like Elizabeth Hansen in the Magic Advent calendar. So she suddenly disappeared in Rome, said Papa. Why didn't she want to see you again? I've asked myself that question many times in the years that have passed since then. The answer is that she had to be very careful about who she talked to. That was why she turned her name upside down and took Tabasile as her surname. We mustn't forget that there was a war in the country she came from. Elizabeth was afraid of being kidnapped again. Go on, said Papa. When I told her I believed her angel story, her suspicions were aroused. She was afraid I might be a dangerous person where her own safety was concerned and for the Palestinian people. But wasn't Elizabeth Norwegian? Mama wanted to know. Yes, she was Norwegian, answered John. Elizabeth thinks she was kidnapped by some very unhappy people who were willing to do almost anything so that the world should have its eyes open to the suffering of the Palestinian people. All the same, it was dreadful to kidnap an innocent child, said Mama. Of course, you're quite right. Elizabeth thinks they must have intended to take her back. Perhaps the people who kidnapped her wanted to try to get her father to write in the papers about all the people who were driven from village to village and finally herded into huge refugee camps outside their own country. So why wasn't she taken back? Interrupted Papa. Elizabeth says she remembers very little until she was looked after by a big family in the tiny village outside Bethlehem. And what is your explanation? Asked Mama. You know what that is already, said John. Joachim was sitting on the edge of his chair. You think she did follow the lamb with the bell and met the angel Ethereal in the woods? He asked. John nodded. I still do. No, said Elizabeth. Yes, said John. No, said Elizabeth, and laughed. The others began laughing too. You mustn't start quarreling, said Joachim, and you shouldn't start thumbing your noses at each other either. I believe Elizabeth's story, said Papa. And what about you? Asked John, looking at Mama and Joachim. I believe 24 times more in John's story, said Joachim. Then I'll have to vote 12 times for John's story and 12 times for Elizabeth's, decided Mama, because I think a few angels have flown to Bethlehem this Christmas, and back again here, for that matter. But Joachim is right when he said he mustn't start quarreling, even though we believe slightly different things, said John. That's the message of Christmas, too. Maybe it's the greatest of all truths, that the glory of heaven is easily scattered, at least if we humans share in dividing it all out. When I wrote on those scraps of paper that I folded up so carefully and put inside the Magic Advent calendar, I had a few clues. I had heard about Elizabeth Hansen, who disappeared, and I had met Tabasile in Rome, and I had the old angel stories to rely on as well. The rest of it I had to imagine myself. Silence fell in the sitting room. You managed it very well, said Mama. John smiled shyly. The imagination also is a tiny piece of glory of heaven that is strayed down to earth. It, too, can be scattered very easily. It's all amazing, said Mama. We open the last door in an old advent calendar and hear about Elizabeth, who goes into a stable in Bethlehem to welcome the Christ child into the world. Immediately afterwards, the same Elizabeth rings a doorbell in our own house, so it almost seems as if this house is the same as the stable where Jesus was born. She stood up and put her arms around Elizabeth. "Welcome back to Norway, my child," she said. That was a funny thing to say, since Elizabeth was almost 20 years older than Mamma. "Thank you very much," said Elizabeth, and she said those words in Norwegian. A little later, the phone rang. Papa took it, and Joachim knew at once who he was talking to because he heard Papa say, "We're all overwhelmed. The Christmas present of the year, Mrs. Hansen. Yes, now I believe in angels as well. Well, here she is, and a happy Christmas, a very happy Christmas to all your family." Papa made a sign to Elizabeth and gave her the receiver. She spoke English, so Joachim couldn't understand what she was saying, but he thought it must be strange to talk to your own mother in a foreign language. Before long, Elizabeth and John had to leave, but they would all meet again after Christmas, because Mama and Papa and Joachim had been invited to a big Christmas party at the home of Elizabeth's family. The guests were escorted to the front door. Outside, it was snowing heavily. Papa asked whether Elizabeth could remember any Norwegian from when she was small. She stood under the outside light while the snow poured down on her red coat. Suddenly she bent down and stretched out her hand as if she was trying to catch the dancing snowflakes. "Lambkin, lambkin, lambkin," she said. She put her hand up to her mouth in alarm. The next moment she was started running. A few seconds later, she and the old flower seller were gone. Late that evening, when Joachim was going to bed, he stood for a long time in front of his window, staring out into the Christmas night. There had been a huge fall of new snow, but now it was clear enough to see the stars. Suddenly, he caught sight of some figures running past down on the road. It was not easy to keep his eyes on them, for he could only see in the light of the street lamps, and the sight lasted for only a second or two. Joachim thought he had recognized the angel Ephraim and all the others who accompanied Elizabeth to Bethlehem. That night, they had escorted her back. The end. Well, I've got chills. That was an amazing story. I would have never guessed the ending, although we have plenty of clues, but still. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed just relishing Jesus during this Advent season. And today is Christmas Eve, and tomorrow is Christmas Day, and we get to celebrate the birth of our Savior. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas, and also a very, very happy and abundant New Year of 2021. Have fun celebrating the birth of our Savior.